The unprecedented reality of Brad Pitt's biological children dropping his surname marks a tragic and highly publicized final chapter in the collapse of Hollywood's most iconic dynasty. For decades, the Pitt-Jolie family represented the absolute pinnacle of global celebrity, yet the current narrative has abruptly shifted from glamorous red carpets to the stark, sobering realities of a fractured household. This is no longer merely a superficial story of a bitter divorce or a protracted financial dispute over a French winery. It is a profound psychological examination of severed familial bonds. The recent revelations surrounding Shiloh, Knox, and Vivienne Jolie, the three biological offspring of the former couple, acting in unison to legally and publicly erase their father's name from their identities, represent a definitive and staggering rebuke that transcends ordinary Hollywood gossip. The timeline of this estrangement reveals a methodical, deliberate distancing rather than a sudden outburst of adolescent rebellion. The most glaring catalyst occurred recently when Shiloh, Nouvelle, immediately upon reaching her 18th birthday, retained independent legal counsel to formally file a petition dropping her father's hyphenated surname. This calculated legal maneuver moves far beyond typical family friction. It is a permanent, documented declaration of independence from Brad Pitt's legacy. This heavy sentiment is unequivocally shared by her younger siblings. Public records and professional credits confirm that the twins, Knox Leon and Vivienne Marceline, have adopted the exact same stance. Whether it is Vivienne being credited simply as Vivienne Jolie in a recent Broadway playbill for a production she contributed to, or Knox utilizing the singular maternal surname for major life milestones like his high school graduation, the collective message is uniform and devastatingly clear. Analyzing the psychological and emotional fallout of this unified front offers a sobering look at the private agony existing behind carefully curated public personas. Industry insiders and close confidants report that Brad Pitt is currently grappling with profound devastation. The inherent heartbreak of watching one's own flesh and blood consciously sever their deepest ancestral tie is an agonizing ordeal, regardless of an individual's immense wealth or global status. It raises critical, uncomfortable questions about the internal dynamics of the Jolie-Pitt household post-separation and the deeply rooted, unresolved grievances that would compel all three biological children to collectively reject their father's identity. What pivotal, unseen events transpired behind closed doors to precipitate such a drastic and seemingly permanent rupture? However, even in the bleakest of family estrangements, the human capacity for reconciliation remains a focal point of psychological analysis. The central question lingering over this ongoing tragedy is whether time and distance can eventually bridge this seemingly insurmountable chasm. Will the maturation of these young adults eventually foster a space for healing, allowing them to revisit their relationship with their father from a perspective of understanding rather than deep-seated resentment? To truly understand the magnitude of this familial fracture, we must first look beyond the superficial glitz of Hollywood and examine the profound psychological weight carried by a surname. A family name is far more than a mere legal identifier printed on passports and birth certificates. It is the invisible thread that binds generations together, carrying with it a legacy, a shared history, and an implicit promise of unconditional belonging. For the children of Brad Pitt, one of the most venerated and universally recognized figures in modern cinematic history, the surname Pitt is synonymous with global influence, immense wealth, and unparalleled artistic prestige. To actively choose to discard such a powerful inherited asset is a decision that defies conventional logic. It is a profound statement of autonomy and a stark rejection of the patriarchal lineage that has defined their public existence since the moment they were born. This is not a passive drifting apart. It is an active, deliberate excision of a father's identity from their own, signaling a level of internal devastation that the public is only just beginning to comprehend. The unraveling of this once impenetrable family unit did not happen overnight. The foundation of this estrangement was laid over years of protracted, highly contentious legal warfare that followed the infamous 2016 incident on a private jet. While the specific, unvarnished truth of what transpired on that flight remains locked behind closed doors and heavily redacted legal documents, the psychological fallout has been playing out in real time for almost a decade. The subsequent divorce proceedings morphed into a grueling, seemingly endless custody battle that subjected the children to the exhausting machinery of the family court system. When children are caught in the crossfires of high-conflict divorces, especially those amplified by the relentless glare of the international media, the home ceases to be a sanctuary. Instead, it becomes a theater of war, where loyalties are tested and emotional survival mechanisms are forged. The Jolie-Pitt children did not merely witness this battle, they were the very subjects of it, their futures debated by armies of high-priced litigators. It is within this crucible of prolonged litigation and emotional turmoil that the seeds of their current rebellion were sown. The turning point in this saga, the moment the private pain became undeniably public, arrived with Shiloh Nouvelle's 18th birthday. In the United States, turning 18 is a monumental rite of passage, traditionally celebrated as the threshold of adulthood and the acquisition of legal independence. For Shiloh, however, this milestone was not marked by typical teenage celebrations, but a meticulously planned legal maneuver. On the exact day she reached the age of majority, Shiloh retained her own independent legal counsel, reportedly paying for the services with her own funds, to file a formal petition in Los Angeles County to legally change her name from Shiloh Jolie-Pitt to simply Shiloh Jolie. This detail is paramount in understanding the depth of the situation. By hiring and compensating her own attorney, Shiloh ensured that her decision could not be dismissed as the manipulation of her mother or the whimsical impulse of a teenager. It was a calculated, sovereign act of an adult woman asserting total control over her narrative and her identity. She utilized her first breath of legal freedom to sever the most fundamental tie to her father. This definitive action by the eldest biological child sent a clear, unmistakable message that resonated deeply with her younger siblings. The solidarity among the Jolie-Pitt children has always been a defining characteristic of their family dynamic, but it has now galvanized into a unified front against their father. Vivienne Marceline, who has spent her formative years developing a deep passion for the theatrical arts alongside her mother, recently provided her own public declaration of independence. While working as an assistant on the Broadway production of The Outsiders, a project she heavily influenced Angelina to produce, Vivienne was listed in the official playbill. The credit did not read Vivienne Jolie-Pitt, as she had been known for 16 years, but simply Vivienne Jolie. In the highly scrutinized world of theater, where credits are meticulously reviewed and approved, this omission of her father's name was a deliberate public rebranding. It was a quiet yet deafening assertion that in her professional and public life, she belongs solely to her mother's lineage. Her twin brother, Knox Vivienne, has echoed this sentiment through his own life milestones. While Knox has historically maintained a lower public profile than his sisters, recent reports regarding his high school graduation and official documentation indicate a similar adoption of the singular Jolie surname. The twins' actions, mirroring Shiloh's legal petition, eliminate any remaining ambiguity about the biological children's collective stance. This is no longer an isolated incident of one child harboring a specific grievance. It is a systemic rejection by an entire generation. It is crucial to note that this biological trio is following a precedent set by their older, adopted siblings, Maddox, Pax, and Zahara, who have long distanced themselves from Brad Pitt both privately and publicly. Zahara notably introduced herself to her university sorority as Zahara Marley Jolie, while Pax has allegedly authored scathing social media posts detailing his fractured relationship with his adoptive father. The fact that the biological children, who once shared an unbreakable genetic and legal bond with Pitt, have now joined the ranks of their estranged older siblings illustrates a comprehensive and devastating collapse of the father-child dynamic across the entire family spectrum. The human element at the center of this tragedy is the undeniable agony experienced by a father watching his family disintegrate from the outside. Industry insiders and close associates of Brad Pitt have painted a portrait of a man who is profoundly devastated and largely isolated from the family he helped create. The paradox of his existence is striking. He is a man who possesses every conceivable material advantage, universal acclaim, and the adoration of millions, yet he is entirely powerless to mend the broken bonds with the individuals who matter most. Reports suggest that he has spent years attempting to navigate the complexities of the custodial arrangement, seeking avenues for reconciliation and working on his own personal demons in the hopes of being a better presence in their lives. However, the continuous, unified rejection by his children suggests that the damage inflicted during the turbulent years of the marriage and the subsequent divorce may be far more deeply rooted than any legal settlement can address. The heartbreak of realizing that your children do not want your name, your presence, or your legacy is a universal pain that transcends the boundaries of wealth and celebrity. This mass estrangement naturally invites intense scrutiny and debate among psychologists and observers regarding the dynamics of parental alienation versus justified protective estrangement. The court of public opinion is quick to assign blame, often pointing fingers at Angelina Jolie for allegedly fostering a hostile environment or manipulating the children against their father. Conversely, others argue that children, especially as they mature into young adults, are highly perceptive and capable of forming their own independent judgments based on their lived experiences behind closed doors. They argue that the children are simply establishing necessary emotional boundaries to protect their own mental well-being after years of domestic instability. Without access to the heavily guarded private realities of their household, it is impossible for the public to definitively categorize the nature of this schism. What remains indisputable, however, is the outcome: a family irrevocably fractured and a patriarch left to grapple with the silent, echoing absence of his children. Looking toward the future, the narrative arcs of these young adults will continue to unfold independently of the Brangelina mythology. Shiloh, Knox, and Vivienne are stepping into the world not as the hyphenated extensions of a Hollywood power couple, but as individuals determined to forge their own paths under a single chosen banner. Their decision to drop the Pitt surname is a definitive closing of one chapter and the opening of another, one where they dictate the terms of their engagement with the public and with their past. For Brad Pitt, the road ahead appears steep and emotionally arduous. Legal victories regarding property and business assets will likely provide little comfort against the cold reality of a fractured family tree. The prevailing hope among those who have followed this saga is that time, the ultimate arbiter of human conflict, may eventually soften the hardened edges of this resentment. Perhaps in the distant future, when the wounds of the divorce are no longer fresh and the children have fully established their independent adult identities, there might be a tentative space for healing. Until then, the world watches as one of its most famous families continues to navigate the devastating, deeply human complexities of grief, identity, and the agonizing consequences of a broken home.